we'll start with this. Well, up-and-coming prospect Shakur Stevenson was in action this past weekend, and he made short work of Alberto Guevara, the kind of opponent you expect Shakur Stevenson to make short work of. And, not long after, he began calling out the champions. One in particular, he tweeted, "Yo, Josh Warrington, are you free in December? I'll be more than honored to come to England." To which the IBF champion Josh Warrington replied, "Get yourself a belt, son, and I'll be more than welcoming for you." I saw people responding to this. Shakur Stevenson's call out, Josh Warrington's response. I saw people out there in the boxing community throwing out the duck word, that somehow in Josh Warrington asking Shakur Stevenson to get a belt, he's just trying to find a creative way to duck the young up-and-coming lion. And to that I'll say this. I don't agree with that sentiment, because Josh Warrington, this is a guy who really has earned his stripes. He squared off with the likes of Kiko Martinez, Lee Selby, big names like Carl Frampton, who I thought was going to win that fight, and, he didn't. Credit to Josh Warrington. And more recently, he squared off against Kid Galahad in what was a very competitive fight. I don't feel that a guy in Josh Warrington's position is avoiding a fight with Shakur Stevenson by asking him to incentivize himself as an opponent, because one of these guys needs the fight more than the other, and it's not Josh. I can't sit here and wholeheartedly say that I think what Josh is proposing is somehow outrageous or unprecedented. I mean, Josh has what you want, but what do you have that Josh wants?
Nothing.
Now, if Shakur Stevenson were to secure a spot as Josh's mandatory challenger for that IBF title, if Josh were to then deny him a shot, okay, then we can call it a duck. But as it stands, that hasn't happened yet. The good news is, however, that Shakur Stevenson is the highest ranked contender via the IBF. So he's knocking on Josh's door, you understand. He's breathing down that guy's neck.
He's close.
And he's not just the highest ranked contender via the IBF, he's also the highest ranked contender via the WBA and the WBO. So he could end up getting a shot at Oscar Valdez or
for his WBO.
Or Leo Santa Cruz.
For his WBA.
It all depends on which mandate from which sanctioning body comes down first, and then which fight is the more feasible fight between Shakur and the reigning champions, of which there are 3. Now, I'd have to say that the more surefire and more secure route to a world title would have to be the IBF route, because, a mandate could come down from the WBA, but it might be to fight, for the gold belt or the regular belt. It may not be a mandate that would see Shakur fighting Leo Santa Cruz, for example. And, let's be honest, there are cross-promotional and cross-network issues to be addressed in a fight like that. A fight with Oscar Valdez, however, for the WBO, that seems more feasible, more reasonable, something that could happen. It's not sure, it's not secure, but it is a lot more feasible than anything involving Leo Santa Cruz. I mean, let's be honest with ourselves here.
Seriously.
There's a world champion sitting right there on the same side of the street as Leo Santa Cruz, and even he can't get a fight with him. So the odds of Shakur Stevenson getting a fight with him, even as a mandatory challenger, it just doesn't seem likely. What's more likely than that is either an Oscar Valdez fight or a Josh Warrington fight. Now, out of those 2 fights, the more surefire path to a world title really would be a Josh Warrington fight, because that would come by way of the IBF and their mandates, and we all know that the IBF take their mandates very seriously. They would leave Josh Warrington with very little options if the order were to come down for him to defend his title against Shakur. So that really would be the way to go. And what that's basically saying is that while Josh Warrington may not give him the shot straight away, the good news is that Shakur Stevenson, well, he's not far from it. I mean, he may be as close as 1 to 2 fights from it. That's saying that, a mandate could come down for Shakur Stevenson to fight in a final eliminator that could see him becoming Josh Warrington's mandatory challenger. And after that, the rest is going to be history. Josh, he's really not going to have much of a choice but to defend that title against Shakur Stevenson or vacate it and hand that motherfucker over. It's that fucking simple. I saw some of the talk regarding Shakur Stevenson's fight this past week, and I saw some people levying some harsh criticisms against this kid, that he's a pup, that he's this, that he's that, a lot of different things. And I thought to myself, what exactly is the threshold of expectations for a prospect these fucking days. I mean, in all seriousness, you got guys levying criticism at Joe Joyce, a guy like Joe Joyce, who hasn't even been in the game for a full 2 years. This guy's only been fighting for under 2 years, only had 9 fights, 10 now, with this Bryant Jennings victory. You got guys criticizing Shakur Stevenson, who also...
Less than 2 years in.
You know, he hadn't been around that long. He's only been around since 2017, you understand? This is another guy who hasn't been in the game a full 2 years. Another guy who's only been fighting as a professional boxer for under 2 years, only has 12 professional fights, yet you got all these Burt Sugar wannabes out there criticizing the kid for who he's fighting. You know, I see this stuff and I think to myself, you know, boxing fans really are fucking idiots, in all honesty. You know, I don't expect a kid like Shakur, who only has 12 professional fights, 12 now. I don't expect a kid like this to be fighting Godzilla because he's a prospect. He's obviously being brought along. He's obviously being groomed, and there's a precedence for that because he hasn't been fighting very long, and
That's normal.
that's okay. That's the process. You have to trust the process. But people are criticizing this kid at a time where he is calling out the big names. He is calling out a champion. So while his quality of competition might not be the best, even though it really shouldn't be at this stage, but while his quality of competition might not be the best, he is exhibiting the desire to fight better fighters. He has that urgency. He has that dog in him that sees him wanting to fight someone like a Josh Warrington. So how can you really even complain about this kid? You know, the stuff you see in boxing groups these days, the comments you see under boxing videos in the YouTube boxing community, you know, the stuff is just the stuff of legend. How fucking stupid it is. Like, yes, Shakur Stevenson is fighting the kind of fighters that you expect a prospect to fight. So there's no grounds to even criticize him for it. But better still, he does want the big names. He does want the big fights. So why don't you give this kid enough time to get the big fights before you start criticizing him? I mean, it's fucking ridiculous. To surmise my thoughts on Shakur Stevenson's fight this past weekend, his subsequent call-out of Josh Warrington, Shakur is looking the way that he needs to look. He's blowing through these kinds of guys, which indicates that, yes, he's about ready for a step up in competition. But let me tell you something. The sport of boxing is full of cautionary tales about these young up-and-coming prospects that show a world of promise, but were thrust into situations that they weren't quite ready for. So I'm okay with Shakur Stevenson being on this bring-along process.
Because he's a prospect.
Because you're not supposed to expect that much of a prospect. He needs to go from a prospect to a contender, and from a contender to a champion. So give the kid a chance to do that before you go criticizing him over who he's fighting. Now, in light heavyweight news, there are some titillating developments in the 175-pound division. You see, Michael Benson tweeted that a fight is being finalized between the WBC champion, Alexander Gvozdyk, and the IBF champion, Artur Beterbiev, for what could be a unification fight in the fall. Ladies and gentlemen, when I told you that Top Rank gets these kinds of fights done in a timely fashion, now do you see what I'm talking about?
That didn't take long.
You know that Artur Beterbiev, he hasn't been on that side of the street for very long. He was just in action against, who was it, Gvozdyk, and now he's going into a unification fight. And I'll tell you that the time for that, it really couldn't be better, especially for Beterbiev, who, you know, he's blowing through a lot of guys. This guy's power, if you've seen it, you'll know that this is a guy who can really crack. He's got a great amateur background. We know about his history with Sergey Kovalev, the 2 fights he won against him in the Amis. I mean, essentially, Artur Beterbiev is a guy who people have been waiting to see in an important fight. And time itself really isn't on his side, because this guy, he's 34 years old, you understand. It's all downhill after 35. So if he's going to make something big happen, the time is now. And a fight against Alexander Gvozdyk is just what the doctor ordered. I will say that a fight between Beterbiev and Gvozdyk, it may not have all the backstory, the backdrop of what could be a fight between Beterbiev and Kovalev, because those guys, they got a lot of history, and people have been wanting to see those two guys fight each other for a long time. This fight could put, you know, it could hamper that, because, you know, what if Fosdick beats him? Oh, fucking well, okay? That's how I feel about that, that yes, I wouldn't mind seeing Beterbiev fight Kovalev, because, you know, I've been waiting for that for a long time, but better still, I'd rather see the winner of this fight Kovalev, whether it's Beterbiev or not. we know that, Kovalev's been all fucking tied up with these negotiations for what is supposed to be your run-of-the-mill mandatory title defense against Anthony Yarde. And that whole situation, I've said it many times, it seemed bizarre to me because it was getting the kind of hiccups, the kind of roadblocks and just dysfunction that you get from a mega fight. That, guys can't quite agree or things aren't quite happening the way that they're supposed to. And those are things that are more commonplace for a big fight, a mega fight. Whereas Anthony Yarde, God bless the kid, he's not a big name yet, so what's the fucking holdup? If this is your mandatory challenger and you gotta defend your title against this guy, then why hasn't the fight gotten made yet, you understand? Lots of stumbling blocks with that thing. But Kovalev's been all tied up with that for weeks and months. So if he is successful in that fight in August 24th, there's going to be a lot of pressure on him to go from that right into a unification fight. I mean, no other fight for Sergey Kovalev, if he wins that Yarde fight, but no other fight for him makes sense aside from a unification fight. It's about that time. Kovalev's not getting any younger, people. Now back to what could be this upcoming unification fight between Gvozdyk and Beterbiev. I'd have to say that the matchup itself, it's an intriguing matchup. It really is the boxer versus the puncher, with Gvozdyk being the boxer and Beterbiev being the puncher. But better still, what's intriguing is that both of these guys actually have an interesting punch. I'd say that Beterbiev is the more sizable puncher of the two, but it's well within Gvozdyk's capabilities to hurt Beterbiev, because lest we forget, he got dropped by Callum Johnson.
Remember that?
So there are holes in his defense to be addressed. If this fight is to come off before the year is out in the fall, if this fight is to come off in the fall and we're going to try to forecast the outcome, we're going to have to cross-compare these guys' opponents. What have they been doing leading up to this point that would prepare one fighter for the other? You understand? Because neither one of these two guys has a whole lot of fights. They ain't got 20, 30, 40 fucking fights. These guys really haven't been around that long, and they don't have a whole lot of professional experience. You look at Artur Beterbiev, a respectable resume for a guy who hasn't been around that long and only has a few pro fights. I mean, he doesn't have that many, but he does stand today as a world champion. So there's something to be addressed there, and it's that this guy's good. He's a good fighter. To have achieved that in that amount of time, yeah, he's a good fighter. He is. But better still, good fighter or not, how have those guys prepared Beterbiev for the kind of fighter that is Alexander Gvozdyk? Which one of them was a statuesque, nimble guy like Alexander Gvozdyk with a quality right hand, good boxing acumen? Which one of those guys posed similar challenges? And I think that what you will find is that no one that Beterbiev has faced so far is quite like Gvozdyk. Whereas in the case of Gvozdyk, has Gvozdyk faced a concussive, one-hitter-quitter kind of fighter? Has he squared off against that kind of fighter before, and how did he look? If we're going to answer that question, the answer is yes. Gvozdyk has faced a sizable puncher. He had to face a sizable puncher to become a champion, and he did that in that champion's backyard. We know who we're talking about, people. We're talking about Adonis Stevenson, one of the more devastating punchers of the light heavyweight division. This is a guy who can get you out of there with one fucking shot. Gvozdyk fought that guy. Gvozdyk starched that guy. So I feel like Gvozdyk is a bit more prepared for this situation than Beterbiev. That doesn't make it a walk in the park, because Beterbiev, he does pack the kind of punch that could really hurt a guy. Even if his resume doesn't tell that story, his punch does. So it's still competitive. But as far as the quality of the fighter's competition, the edge would have to go to Gvozdyk. He fought a sizable puncher. He fought the kind of guy that can get you out of there with one shot. And he put that guy in the hospital, If we break the question down to simplest terms, the question is, has Alexander Gvozdyk ever faced a devastating puncher like Beterbiev is a devastating puncher? And the answer to the question is yes. Whereas if we look at, Beterbiev's resume, you don't see a guy on there that's quite like Gvozdyk. A good boxer with a very respectable punch, quality right hand, real boxing acumen. So in that way, I'm leaning a little bit towards Gvozdyk. I'm not settled on it. I need to see some more footage. I need to see what scenarios are available. But I will say that from the look of it, first glance, it kind of looks like Gvozdyk's a bit more prepared for this kind of a situation than Beterbiev is. I think that the timing really couldn't be better for that fight. And, I think the Top Rank is definitely making the right decision because, you're not going to get a star out of either one of these two guys individually. You have to match them against each other to really get people's attention so that the victor can get the spoils. Thus, a unification fight is just what the doctor ordered. I told you guys, expect that Top Rank would get the fight done in a timely fashion because, well, 3 of the 4 light heavyweight champions are on that same side of the street, and Top Rank won't drag their feet to make such a fight happen the way that, some or one other outfit that's out there would drag their feet in just that kind of a situation. So it's good news all around. Let's hope that it checks out, and we do get to see that fight in the fall.